Somewhere in the middle of the ocean, in the dead of night, a ship the size of a 40-story building lying on its side is moving through open water in complete darkness. No headlights, no road, just black water in every direction. And on the bridge, one officer watching a glowing screen. Then the screen shows something it shouldn't. A dot, far away, but it isn't behaving the way distant dots are supposed to behave. Most ships passing each other at night show their position on screen slowly drifting sideways, a sign that the two vessels are simply going to glide past one another at a safe distance, the way two cars in neighboring lanes drift apart on a wide road. This dot isn't drifting. Its direction stays locked in place while the distance keeps shrinking, second after second. To a trained eye, that's the most dangerous pattern on the entire radar. It means, in plain words, if nothing changes, these two ships are going to meet in the same spot at the same time. Nobody needs a calculator to feel the weight of that. The officer already knows. Now here's the part that should genuinely surprise you. In a car, in this exact moment, you'd slam the brakes, the car would scream, the tires would grip, and you'd stop in a few seconds. A ship this size has no brakes. None. Not hidden somewhere below deck, not a backup system for emergencies. They were never built. There is no pedal, no pad, no disc, nothing on this entire vessel whose only job is to stop it. And yet somehow, ships this size do stop every single day, all over the world, without ever touching land or another vessel. How is that even possible? To understand it, you need to forget everything you know about stopping a vehicle, because a ship doesn't stop, not the way you're imagining. It negotiates its way to a halt using nothing but the very same machine that was pushing it forward a moment earlier, just convinced, slowly and carefully, to start pushing the other way instead. Let's go below deck and see what that actually looks like. The engine has only one job, and it's doing it right now. Picture the engine room of a large cargo ship. It isn't like a car engine sitting under a hood. It's enormous, sometimes taller than a two-story house, loud enough that workers wear ear protection just standing near it, and connected in one unbroken mechanical chain directly to a single giant propeller at the back of the ship. No gearbox in between, no clutch you can disengage. The engine spins, the shaft spins, the propeller spins. All three, always, at the same time, doing the same thing. That single fact is the root of the entire problem. In a car, you can put it in neutral and coast, completely disconnected from the engine. A ship's propeller almost never gets that luxury. Whatever the engine is doing, the propeller is doing too, which means slowing the ship down isn't as simple as just easing off a pedal. You have to convince the engine itself to change what it's doing, and engines this large don't change their mind quickly. It helps to think of it less like a car and more like a massive industrial machine bolted permanently to a boat. There's no off switch you'd recognize, no idle setting where everything just hums quietly waiting for instructions. Once it's running, it's committed, pushing tons of fuel through itself every hour, driving a shaft as thick as a tree trunk, turning a propeller that, on the largest ships, can be taller than a house itself. So why don't ships just have proper brakes the way cars do? It comes down to a decision engineers made a long time ago for a simple reason. Building a separate braking system powerful enough to stop hundreds of thousands of tons of moving steel would mean adding something almost as large and complicated as a second engine room, purely for emergencies that, hopefully, happen rarely. Instead, they decided to reuse what was already there. If the engine is strong enough to push the ship forward, the thinking went, then with the right sequence, it should also be strong enough to push it backward. Stopping became less about building something new and more about learning to run the existing engine in reverse, carefully without destroying it. Step 1. Asking, not commanding. Here's something most people don't know. On a large ship, the captain doesn't control the engine directly. There's no key, no throttle right under his hand. Instead, there's a system going back over 100 years in concept where the bridge sends a request down to the engine room and a separate team of engineers physically carries it out. So the moment the danger is spotted, the order goes down. Slow the engine. Not stop, not reverse, just slow, while everyone figures out exactly how serious this is. And here's where the size of the ship becomes the real enemy. The engine begins easing off. Down in the engine room, dials begin to fall. But up on deck, almost nothing happens. The ship doesn't slow with the engine. It keeps gliding through the water on pure leftover momentum, the same way a heavy shopping cart keeps rolling for a few seconds after you let go of it, except scaled up by a factor of thousands. A ship this size, moving at a normal cruising speed, can still be traveling at a meaningful pace of full 10 minutes or more after the engine first starts winding down. 10 minutes, while that dot on the radar keeps closing in. Step 2. The order nobody wants to give. If the danger doesn't ease, there's only one command left, and every engineer dreads hearing it at full speed.
full reverse. This is the moment that should genuinely change how you think about ships forever. You cannot simply flip a giant spinning engine backward the instant it's running forward at full power. If you tried, you'd tear the engine apart from the inside, bend the metal arms connecting the moving parts, crack the bearings, potentially punch a hole straight through the engine's own body. It would be like trying to instantly reverse a giant flywheel spinning at full speed by grabbing it with your bare hands. The engine simply isn't built to survive that kind of sudden disrespect. So instead, something almost paradoxical happens. Before the engine can push the ship backward, it first has to be slowed down to a specific safe speed, almost stopped in engine terms, using bursts of compressed air blasted directly into its working parts, fighting against the pistons that are still moving. It's an engine being braked, using brute mechanical force before that same engine can even begin trying to brake the ship. Imagine that. The very first stage of stopping the ship is stopping the engine itself. Twice the problem, solved in sequence because there's no shortcut available. Step 3, losing your steering at the worst possible moment. While all of this is happening, something else is quietly going wrong, and it's almost cruel in its timing. A ship steers using its rudder, a giant flat panel at the back that redirects water flow to push the back of the ship one way or the other. But that only works if water is actively flowing past it with some force, which mostly comes from the ship moving forward and the propeller pushing water backward. The moment the ship starts slowing down, that water flow weakens, which means the rudder, the only tool that might let the crew simply steer around the danger instead of stopping for it, starts losing its grip on the situation at the exact moment it's needed most. Turn the wheel hard and the ship might barely respond. It's like trying to steer a bicycle that's almost stopped moving. Turning the handlebars does almost nothing once there's no forward motion left to redirect. So the crew is fighting two problems that work against each other. Slowing down to avoid danger also disables the steering that could have avoided the danger a different way. Step 4. The engine finally fights back. Down in the engine room, the safe threshold is finally reached. The order locks into place. And now the propeller, which moments ago could only push water one direction, begins turning the opposite way. On smaller, more nimble vessels, this can happen in well under 15 seconds because their propeller blades are designed to twist on their own axis, like a fan blade rotating to change which way it blows air without the whole shaft ever needing to stop spinning. But a large cargo ship usually doesn't have that luxury. It often has to physically reverse the rotation of components that together weigh more than a loaded freight train. That doesn't happen instantly. It happens carefully, and it takes real time. Time the crew can feel ticking by, even if they can't see it on a clock. Once it does happen, the propeller starts pulling water forward instead of pushing it backward, clawing at the ocean in the opposite direction on purpose. For the first time since the danger appeared on the radar, something on the ship is finally working against its forward motion instead of with it. But it's not a clean push. Reverse thrust makes the back of the ship want to swing one way or another, unpredictably, depending on which direction the propeller spins. Skilled crews have learned that turning the rudder a specific way during this reversal can actually help the ship stop in a shorter distance and stay straighter while doing it. Turn it the wrong way and the ship drifts further off course while also taking longer to stop. So even the act of slowing down has to be steered carefully the entire time. Step 5. The numbers that explain everything. For a large cargo ship of a common size, not the very biggest in the world, just a typical large vessel, the distance needed to turn out of danger is often around 3/4 of a mile. The distance needed to fully stop using everything available, including full reverse thrust, often falls somewhere between 1.5 to 2.5 miles. That's not a worst case estimate, that's the expected distance, the number every harbor pilot and ship's officer carries in the back of their mind on every single voyage. And it explains something that, on the surface, looks almost overly cautious. Large ships are trained to start changing course or speed when danger is still 4 to 6 miles away. Not because anyone is being dramatic, but because by the time a true emergency develops at closer range, the laws of physics have usually already decided how it ends. Two large ships heading towards each other can close a 6-mile gap between them in well under 10 minutes. There is no version of last-second save that exists inside that kind of math. Step 6. When even the engine isn't enough. If full reverse thrust still isn't enough, if there's an engine failure, a sudden obstacle with no time to plan, a true worst-case emergency, there's one option left, and it's almost shockingly old-fashioned for a ship full of modern engineering. Drop the anchor while still moving. The anchor doesn't catch gently, it drags. It digs straight into the seabed, plowing through mud, sand, and rock, converting the ship's remaining momentum directly into friction and heat at the bottom of the ocean, much like dragging your shoes hard across gravel to stop a fast slide. Massive chain links scream out of their housing as the anchor bites in. It is loud, it is rough on the ship, and it is absolutely a last resort. But it works because at the end of the day, there's no elegant way to argue with hundreds of thousands of tons of moving steel except to give it something solid enough underwater to fight against. It's worth pausing on how strange that actually is. Engineers have built engines producing the same power as tens of thousands of horses, navigation systems tracking dozens of neighboring ships at once, automatic sequences that reverse a massive engine without tearing it apart, and the very last line of defense, the one thing standing between a runaway ship and disaster, is the same basic tool sailors have used for thousands of years: a hook on a chain dropped at the right moment. The biggest ships make every problem worse. And here's the part that should really put things in perspective. The ship in our story tonight isn't close to the very biggest vessel on the ocean. Today's biggest cargo ships are far longer, carry tens of thousands of shipping containers stacked deck after deck, and weigh well over 200,000 tons when fully loaded. Every single problem we just walked through, the engine that can't reverse instantly, the rudder that goes quiet as the ship slows, the minutes spent waiting before reversal can even begin, gets harder, not easier, as the ship gets bigger. Mass doesn't make stopping more efficient. It makes the entire negotiation longer and more delicate. The largest ship ever built, a supertanker that has since been retired and scrapped, once required well over 5 miles of open water just to come to a complete stop, even using every tool available, including the anchor. 5 miles for one ship, one time, in full emergency conditions. That number isn't a design flaw. It's simply the honest price of building something that enormous in an environment that offers no breaks at all. Why it almost always works out fine. Here's the twist most people miss in this story. In the vast majority of cases, none of the dramatic stuff, full reverse, the anchor, any of it, ever actually has to happen, because ships and their crews are trained to make their decisions early while there's still plenty of room and plenty of time. A slight course change made calmly 6 miles out accomplishes everything a frantic last-second stop is trying to accomplish, without any of the risk or the strain on the engine. The emergency stop exists purely as the answer to a question that good seamanship is specifically designed to avoid ever having to ask. It's a bit like a tightrope walker who spent years training never to need the safety net. The net still exists, it's still tested, it's still taken seriously, but a good walker's entire skill is built around the goal of never finding out whether it actually works. That's really what's happening on the bridge of every large ship, every night, all over the world. Officers aren't reacting to danger as it appears. They're constantly, quietly, almost invisibly preventing it from ever fully arriving. The radar screen that caught our .8 miles out wasn't catching a surprise. It was doing exactly what it was built to do, giving a human being enough warning, enough distance, and enough time to make a small, calm decision instead of a desperate, dramatic one. So the next time you see a massive ship gliding calmly into a harbor, seemingly under total effortless control, remember what's actually happening behind that calm appearance. Somewhere, an officer made a quiet decision miles ago that you'll never see, specifically so that nobody on board ever had to
Find out, the hard way, just how long it really takes for something that size to stop. Because once you actually need that answer, the outcome has usually already been decided long before anyone touches the controls. The real skill in commanding a ship this size was never about stopping it well. It was about never having to. If you want to see how other massive machines fight against their own size and momentum just to do things smaller vehicles take for granted, stick around. There's a lot more where this came from.